I've seen castles like that in Scotland also. That's where I would have figured it was, right?
Outer Hebrides, that's where I was.
Uh-huh.
An island called Barra.
Uh-huh. No, I was in Edinburgh, and I said to someone on a sunny day, it's such a beautiful city. And the guy said, yeah, when you can see it.
That's right.
But it's beautiful.
I've been there a couple times. It's really nice.
Yeah.
Did you go look at that thing? What is the camera obscura, where you can see what's going on the street?
Probably, but the thing I found the strangest was the memorial, that really funny looking Victorian thing that you can actually climb up. It's like, I think the Albert Memorial or something. And you can actually climb all the way to the top. So this is this crazy looking Victorian thing, of course.
Hello, Joel.
Hi, Tanya.
Hello.
Ah.
Hi. How's everybody?
Oh.
All right.
Good.
Oh, so I have to think about that. I would say, okay.
Hi, Tanya. Good to see you again.
Lizette, how are you?
Hi.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Get myself set up here.
I got an email from Mr. Simon with a request pertaining to the agenda, but Mr. Simon is
Not here.
not logged in. But then again, it's only 7:04.
True. He needs to go get dinner, so it'll be at least another 20 minutes, and then he can eat during the meeting.
Yeah, that's not us.
So we get to see Vivian's bookcase.
We do, and I've actually been getting rid of books, so it's getting more kind
That's
of.
when I noticed they're all like at angles, right?
Yeah. I've got to now I can reorganize and pull books from behind forward.
Too many books.
Exactly, but I also like them. Nice shirt.
Hi, Daniel. I didn't realize Daniel was on CB12.
It's Steve. Amazing.
Indeed. This may be a record for him.
So I'm going to get ready to begin. So it's 7:06 p.m. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I have a quick question. Daniel, are you here as just a board member, or are you a new member of the land use committee?
He's just there visiting. He's not assigned to your committee.
But we're going to have to kidnap him, okay? So I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair land use for Manhattan Community Board 12. Before we begin, I'd like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves, and starting with who I see on my upper left-hand side, Vivian. Vivian, you're muted.
Now, good.
Yeah.
I'm still Vivian Ducat. I'm the public member of the Land Use Committee for a while.
Thank you, Vivian. Jim.
I'm Jim Berlin. I've been on this committee a long time, as you might be able to see.
Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya, a board member and member of Land Use Committee.
Steve.
Steve Simon, member of the Land Use Committee.
Joel or Joel. Joel, you're muted. Well, Joel may have stepped away. Joel Abreu is also a member of Manhattan Community Board 12 Land Use Committee. And we have a non-committee member, board member joining us. So Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself? But you're muted. Daniel?
Yes.
No, just introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. I have like a choppy connection here. My name is Daniel. I'm part of CB12. I'm normally in the Parks and Cultural Affairs and also in the Youth and Education meetings committee, better said.
Thanks. So we have a couple of discussions scheduled for this evening. One with the Manhattan Borough President's liaison and staff, and a couple sort of internal to the committee discussing some changes to R8 zoning that the community board requested via resolution most recently at the beginning of the year. But prior to that, in planning studies and other resolutions, and then a discussion that was deferred from last month's meeting to consider some potential recommendations for modifications to city planning's Fresh 2 program. However, before we get into that, as I mentioned, one of our committee members, Steve Simon, emailed an hour or so ago to mention that there are a number of community residents who are concerned with the restart of a development, an overlook terrace that those of you who've been on the board for a while know that probably going back to 2006, 2007, was underway, and then just for a number of reasons, died. I think the developer went bankrupt and it was a tricky site. So what we can do is kind of reverse the order of the agenda and talk about this initially as new business for a few minutes to get a sense of what some of the concerns are. I think it's beneficial that we have representatives of the Borough President's Office and of City Planning here to listen to them. So I see one hand from Laura. I'm going to click on allow to talk, and Laura, I guess, are you here to talk about the Overlook Terrace project?
Okay, forgive me, Wayne, before you continue, may I interject and ask a question?
Surely.
Could you give us the exact location of this? I mean, I lived in a neighborhood, but I want to make sure that you're.
So we're talking about the 184th and Overlook. I believe the street address is 29 Overlook Terrace, but right now it is probably, when you look at it, a sloping, rock covered site that probably shows signs of excavation from years ago, but it's 184th Overlook.
And that's immediately adjacent to the entrance to the subway, correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Sort of above it.
Thank you so much.
Wayne, if I could just add, the site extends up the hill to Fort Washington Avenue. and the previous developer, in fact, bought air rights and actually bought a portion of the Fort Tryon Jewish Center, which is at 524 Fort Washington, next to the upper level entrance to the subway station.
Right, it
so
slopes from Overlook all the way up the hill.
Yeah, it goes up to, and in fact, he intended to call it, give it an address of 1 Bennett Park. But
Okay, but so that, yeah, that's kind of the background on the prior project. Laura,
Yes, can you hear me?
yes,
This is just a logistics question because the Q&A, I was trying to put questions in and just to know that I was in the right place because this is a different kind of venue than I'm used to. So is the Q&A going to be a place where we can post questions or?
well, that wouldn't be the most efficient way. As I said, my understanding is there are a number of residents who had interest with this particular project we're talking about. So, I mean, normally we would deal with old business and new business at the end of the agenda. But I thought we would kind of reverse that order and get some, feedback now, particularly since we have with us representatives of both the Borough President's Office and the Department of City Planning.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So, I mean, that's why I unmuted you, because if you wanted to talk about that project, instead of doing Q&A, you can speak to the committee.
Okay, I'll wait until I hear what's going on and thank you. I'll just mute myself for a bit and then if I have a question, I'll raise my hand again. Thank you.
Sure. Jim, I see your hand up.
Yes, that's because I have some additional information that not everyone is aware of. Originally, there was this deal that Steve spoke of. Since then, the bank or whoever it was that had most of the property bought out the synagogue, and it's all one parcel. And the synagogue had a formal de-sanctification ceremony or whatever it was. And then from what I've just heard, according to what's, we may hear tonight, that parcel was actually sold to a developer, and that's all now one piece of whatever. And, that's a slight bit of additional information.
yeah.
And just for the committee's reference, but also for any community residents who are here or interested in this, I did reach out to our district manager previously to ask to outreach to the new owners, invite them to make a presentation to the land use committee. And I see in some emails today that they have outreach. They have not yet received a response, but also I see they were in touch with the building department. And from what I can see, there currently is not a new application that is approved. So there should be no work underway now. So we had a somewhat similar situation a couple months ago where it appeared that there was construction underway at a site, but there were no active permits, or that there was in fact a stop order. If something like that happens, there is absolutely no need to wait to discuss that with a committee of the community board. Or you can go directly to our district manager, Ebenezer Smith, inform him of the issue so that he can coordinate directly with the building department. Because once again, if there are no permits or if there's a stop work order, then there should be no activity on site. Jim, is that an old hand or a new hand? Steve?
Yeah, what I'm wondering, Wayne, and I appreciate the fact that you moved this up on the agenda. What I'm wondering is, what I read in the social media is that what's happening on the site is basically tree removals. Maybe the people who are in the audience can can go into further detail if there is actual construction. So my question would be for the buildings department, does tree removal constitute construction activity that they would slap a stop work order against? Or can they, I'd like to know, and this is a question I guess we'll pose to Ebenezer. I'd like to know whether or not they are actually allowed to go ahead and do any work along those lines.
Well, that's a good question to pose. I would suspect that, site clearance per se is not construction, but we'll have DOB, answer that question directly unless, the Borough President's Office of City Planning, has that and they can get back to us on that later. Jim, I see your hand again.
Yes, thank you. I walked by there and it's right by the subway entrance, and it turns out that big green fence, or whatever color it is now, it's actually leaning and it's about to collapse. So when Ebenezer talks to DOB or whoever, he should also mention the state of that fence.
Okay.
In
I
terrible
see a couple of hands up. I saw Paul for a bit, and now I see Mary as well. So Paul, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to speak. Paul? Paul, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe Paul doesn't want to speak. So Mary, you are next.
Hi, everyone. I'm a resident at 725 West 184th Street, and I look straight down onto this site that we're talking about, and there has indeed been tree removal, and in the process, the fence that was already wobbly before has gotten wobblier because it's kind of, a very efficient and kind of aggressive approach of how these trees are being taken down. So I just wanted to confirm that this has taken place last week and last Saturday, and currently I'm not in the apartment, so I don't know what the very present state is. I'm imagining they're all done with it. And of course, I'm absolutely terrified at the prospect of this building going up. So
other than tree removal or other site clearance, is there anything else happening on site?
I haven't seen anything else. It's just this tree removal company that's come in and has done this work. And, the site is sort of an interesting little side story there. There's the building on West 183rd Street. I think it's 731 West 183rd. It looks like for years and years, the super has been just dumping all the garbage down that pretty steep slope. And it's a real disgrace. There's, large plastic items there, like laundry baskets and children's toys and all kinds of stuff. And then also garbage bags. And, all this has become much more visible with the tree removal. But aside from tree removal, there hasn't been any activity.
Right. And the using, a private site as one's, junkyard is also not an attractive thing for neighbors to do. So the development project is one issue, but if the super has been basically using the site to dump garbage, that's not good either at all.
Yeah.
Next person I'll see in line is Chris Jones.
Oh, hi. My name is Rochelle Hochstadt, and I just want to remind, okay, I'm sorry, I'm wearing a mask. I'm in somebody else's home.
So are you logged in with Chris Jones?
My computer stopped working, just failed on me just 5 minutes ago. So I came to my neighbor and I'm home. That's why I'm wearing a mask. I just want to remind the board, somebody was here, hold on. Mr. Berlin might remember that in 2006, another developer bought the site and had a plan to put up a 23 stories building. So, of course, we came together on the community board meetings, and the community opposed it. And finally, he abandoned the project because he didn't have money or whatever, I don't know. But at that time, geophysicist in the natural hazard expert Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, that's part of the Columbia University. His name is Klaus Jacob. He has a PhD. And he presented his report at the community board meeting, where he strongly opposed of the construction, a high rise on this spot, because he considered it, and he analyzed this, he considered it unsafe. I'm in possession of this report. I kept it for all those years, since June 5th, 2006. And if the community board is interested in reading this report, I will be happy to deliver it to whoever tells me to do it.
Yeah, I think it would be great if you could forward that to our district manager, Ebenezer Smith, so that he can share it with the committee. I remember the discussion and the presentation as well, although I am not Jim Berlin. And, there were, some questions about the analysis and follow-up that I don't know if we ever got, but if we have the analysis now, we can, circle back to whatever questions, were on the table then, and, see what we can find out. So.
I'm sorry, can I continue?
Sure.
Okay, so you suggest that I bring the report to the district manager, right?
Or you can email it. Do you have it as a hard copy, or do you have it scanned?
I have it as a hard copy.
Okay, so I mean, if you could bring, well, two things. I mean, if you can scan it and email it to the district manager, I guess that would be easiest, but you can also bring a copy to the community board office, which is located at 530 West 166th Street, Suite 6A. And, either Ebenezer or Paola Garcia or Chanel can make a copy of it.
Okay, I can make a copy myself and leave it with them.
That would be great.
Or you could just mail it. Use regular postal service.
Yeah, I can do that too. But that if you just hand it in, it is in the hands of the
exactly.
public. And how do you suggest? What is the suggestion about the time? Should I call them in beforehand?
Well, yeah, I mean, the number at the office is 212 568 8500. And just call to confirm, what the current, office hours are.
Okay, and whoever picks up the phone, I can talk about that.
Absolutely. But basically, there are only 3 staffers there. The district manager is Ebenezer, and the 2 other staffers are Paola and Chanel. So either one of them, you could say you have this document for the land use committee. You'd like to give it to them so they can scan it and share it with the committee.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Ma'am, what's your name? Can you spell your first and last name? I'm Tanya, and I'm taking minutes for this meeting. Since you're not on the list, you in someone else's Zoom. Can you give me your first and last name, please?
My name is Rachel, R-A-S-H-E-L, Rachel, first name. The last name is Hochstadt, H-O-C as in Charles, H, S as in Sam, T as in Thomas, A, D as in David, T as in Thomas. It makes Rachel Hochstadt. I live at 735 West 183rd Street. And yes, I will come, I will call up them and bring the report. But while we are talking about it, may I ask you what exactly the community board heard about it and how the community board is going to communicate, a community board communicate with the owners?
We don't have any specific information on the new proposal. I mentioned that we have reached out to the owners to ask them to make a presentation. So whatever has been written about the project, we don't know to what extent it is accurate. We have at this juncture no specific information on what is currently proposed.
Thank you. And can the community board be insistent and ask them to come, where the owners come and make a presentation?
We can certainly ask them, but the thing to remember, and we talk about this frequently, if you have a development project where there is what's considered a discretionary action, meaning if city government has to approve something, if they have to approve a variance or a board of standards of appeals special permit, is there some action that the city has to take? If it's in a land marked district, then the developer has to present per the city process to the land use committee. If it's what's called an as of right development, meaning if the zoning allows you to build a residential building up to a certain density, up to a certain height, and that's what you're proposing, you're not required to come to the community board to make any presentations. There are many developers who do, to give a heads up. But all you would have to do if you're building what's called an as of right development is make sure that the proposed plans meet what is required by the building code, or the building code and the fire code and any energy codes, but it satisfies the municipal codes. Those plans will be reviewed by the building department. They'll be approved. And once they are approved, then you can pull a permit, which is why we were talking about the permits earlier to this meeting, and build it. So as I said, we don't know what they are planning to build. And if they're planning to build something that is consistent with the zoning, and they're not looking to do anything that requires any kind of a variance or a waiver, they don't have to come before. So we can't insist that they come, but we can certainly ask them to come.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
How does the community know the results of your communication with them?
Well, I mean, any member of the community can sign up to get, the calendars and the e-blast from the community board office, and which is something we encourage people to do, because far too frequently, folks seem to, get, looped in only when there's something that is of concern to them. But every month, the community board committees meet, and land use is, talking about issues like this every month. So you can certainly circle back to the district manager's office. You can see what's on the agenda for upcoming meetings. And if we have scheduled a presentation or a discussion with the owners, that would be on the agenda, which is also available online. The calendar and who we are meeting with or speaking with is posted to the community board's calendar, website rather, on a monthly basis.
Okay, thank you. So
you're welcome. So the next person I see is Jamie. Jamie, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Jamie and David here, 725 West 184th Street. So I have a question. As far as you know, is this lot indeed an as right or whatever you just described? Is it that type of lot?
It's not the lot that is as of right. It would be the proposed development. The lot is in a particular zoning district, which allows, and I don't know what that particular zoning is, but the point is, every lot in the city of New York is under a zoning designation. The question is, what is the proposed project? So we don't have the information on the proposed project, and it's the project that either is or is not compliant with the zoning, not the lot per se.
Okay.
So if the lot is zoned for medium density residential, which would be like R72, that means you can build a range of, residential. And I think in an R72, you can also build certain like community facilities. So you could build, office space for a community-based organization, something like that. If you're going to build a hotel, you can't build that in a medium density residential. If you're going to build high density, if you want to build, if, for example, you can only build 3.5 times the size of the site, but because of a number of issues, you need to build, more. That happens a lot on these rocky outcroppings. There might be what's called a, Board of Standards and Appeals process where you're asking for some leniency or some additional density to make up for the added costs. If something like that happens, then the project is not as of right, and there is a discretionary action that the city has to approve, which means they would have to come to the community board. But as I said before, at this juncture, we do not know what is proposed.
Okay. And then who has the final say? Does this board have input as to whether this gets approved, or how?
Well, the community boards are advisors. We don't control the approval process. But once again, if it is an action that requires city action, then one of the things that, whether it's the Department of City Planning or the Landmarks Preservation Commission or the Board of Standards and Appeals, they're looking for what is the position the community board has taken. So we express that position by a resolution. If it's an as of right development, then we can certainly say what we think about the project. And depending upon the developer, they may or may not listen, but they're not obliged to do anything because there's no city action, there's no discretionary action that has to be approved. Now, having said that, going back to the prior project, I believe the developer was Ruddy Thompson.
Yes.
At that time, you may recall the community board was working on a district-wide planning study with the assistance of the City College School of Architecture. And as part of that study, they worked on 3 case studies. One of the sites studied was, in fact, this site, because zoning assumes sites are flat. And, we have a lot of sites in the heights because we are the heights that are not flat. And so what they did is they said, if we were to massage the current zoning a bit, and just kind of model that site, you could get the same density, the same overall square footage in a mid-rise building that fits the neighborhood scale. It would be the same number of units as the proposed 18 to 20 story building that was sitting awkwardly on this sloping site. So when we presented that to Ruddy, he said it was actually an interesting approach. Unfortunately, there was so much money already invested in the prior development project design that it was kind of like too late to reverse. In this case, I don't know how far the development team has got, and I don't know if they'd be interested in taking a look at that model, because at the end of the day, if you want to build 100,000 square feet and you could do it one way or the other, but you're still getting the same square footage, they might be open to it. We're not saying that, you're going to make it smaller, which will be less economically feasible, but, so there are things that can be done if we have willing partners. And some folks may be willing to listen to an alternative, but they would also say, listen, if we're going to take an approach that is not, strictly by the book per zoning, then we're going to be looking for you, the community, and you, the community board, to help us talk to, city government about this. I mean, interestingly enough, we did present the idea to city planning on a couple of occasions of, creating sort of what we would call a hillside zoning district. There is technically a hillside zoning district, but that zoning is really intended for, like, I think Staten Island, some other places, to preserve sort of the natural topography of the hillside per se. It's not designed to work with construction on, sort of hilly sites, of which we have a number of them, in Washington Heights and Inwood. That was a long response.
This isn't just a hilly site. It's a hill, but there and an outcropping. There's huge amounts of, I'm not a geologist. But
it's Manhattan schist. We're very familiar with the site.
In order, the community, the people who are listening have to understand, if you don't live immediately here like we do, it's going to affect you. Then I can't imagine the noise that's going to happen to either shave down or blast away the rock, and the amount of dust and dirt that's going to be created. If you walk to the subways, God only knows what it's going to do to the subway station, which seems kind of fragile. My concern is it's going to not just affect the immediate community around here, but for blocks around, up and back. It's the amount of noise and dust and dirt. It's not a typical, look, we've all been around construction sites, and even small ones where they build very tall buildings in very narrow spaces. This is a very different kind of site. The amount of geology there and the rocks and what's going to have to go on in order to make this thing happen. I think there's a picture of whatever they're proposing on one of their websites. It's a real concern. It's different than what happened on the corner of taking down the old theater on 181, in Broadway.
Yeah, we are actually, the same or very similar concerns were expressed, back in the, 2006, 2007. We have, as a community board and as a land use committee, had to deal with and address issues with, similar sites where, we've got a lot of Manhattan schist up here, and this is just an extreme case of that. But that is also the reason why what I thought was interesting in the case study that City College did. The assumption was not that you would blast the rock. The assumption is that you would work with it. But but the point is
they were using, I think, a massive jackhammering. I don't think they were blasting. But
you can't blast.
So the jackhammers to shave the rock. I understand how that works, but just the amount of noise, it's not a typical, I know you understand that. I just don't know if the people watching and outside of the immediate area understand what they're talking about.
Is this Mr. Emhoff talking?
Scott, yeah.
Gottesfeld. We're together. Jamie Emhoff and David Gottesfeld.
Oh, okay. So I don't think we've seen a rendering of what this building will look like. I think what you're seeing on social media is what Thompson intended to do.
No. There is a rendering. I'm sorry. In the press release of the Ariel partners who sold the building, there is a photo rendering of a potential plan, and it's a huge glass skyscraper that they, in these press releases, they're bragging that they can build up to 275,000 square feet because they have the air rights.
Yeah. Well, and now they have a larger site because they have the entire synagogue site.
Right.
So who knows how dense this thing could end up being? But again, what was in that press release, wasn't that the prior owner, not the new owner?
No, it was made by the picture was featured by the brokers who sold it.
Yeah.
I guess on behalf of the new developers.
All right.
And it looked like I went on the website of the new developers, and mostly all their buildings are like downtown that have been built on a flat street. So I don't know.
Yeah.
My other question,
So,
I have one more question.
All right.
If from today, if they just closed on this lot, like in February, and they're on, step one of what I'm assuming is many, many steps, like, is there some sort of rule of thumb is like from today till doomsday, like how long are we looking at before there's like jackhammers or pile drivers into
yeah,
the ground?
I don't want to speculate on a project that I have no information, but if they literally just closed on the sale and they do
Yeah.
not, and they do not have permits, the building department process is not a fast process. So it's not as if construction is going to begin tomorrow or even in the next couple of months. I want to take a couple more questions and I want to
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. And I want to get into the committee agenda. So I think I saw Lorem.
Laura, did you mean
Well,
Laura?
No, well, I saw Laura from before, but also I'm going in order. So there's Lorem Pendon.
Lauren Peden.
Peden, sorry.
That's okay. Sorry, hold on, I'm getting a call. So my question is actually about the rendering that I think everyone is confused because Ruddy Thompson had been doing the project for however many years, and then now it's circled back. And the rendering that we are seeing online that Steve Simon was talking about, it is and that Jamie Emhoff was talking about, it is a, whatever, 26 or 28 story. It looks like glass or mirrored building. It's like nothing in the neighborhood. Yes, that's it, what Daniel is holding up. So is that Ruddy's original?
No,
That's
no, it's
Thompson.
not.
Yeah, that's
No, it's
Thompson.
not. And you know what? And I don't want to cut it short, but the prior development project, the prior design is years old. The current project, we don't have information on, but we're trying to get it. And, there's not much we can say about what is actually proposed.
Okay. But would something like that fly in this neighborhood? Is there, I mean, it just seems so out of character with everything, and it's going to catch a huge shadow, not only on Bennett.
But once
but
again,
on-
as Steve pointed out, as Steve pointed out and as I pointed out, they now have a larger site. If what they are proposing is consistent with the zoning, then, and they put together plans that are approved by the building department, they legally can build. Now, I think what is interesting is one of the topics for discussion on tonight's agenda is changes to certain R8 zoning. And just to keep it simple, the R8 zoning is a higher density than most of the zoning in the area. I don't know if anyone who is, logged in, any of the residents, participated in the planning study we did back in 2000, probably 2005 through 2007, or has viewed it on the, the website. But one of the things that we talked about coming out of that planning study is a desire to preserve neighborhood scale and character, and to do that by, having the current zoning, which was put in place in 1961, which is considered height factor zoning, to modify that to contextual zoning, because with contextual zoning, it's not just, the density and use, there are also, limits put on building height, so that issues like we're talking about, so that there's a better fit between the existing built form and new buildings. So my point is, even though everyone is logged in to, talk about this building, it sounds like one of the things that everyone should also be focused on is, what kind of traction is the community board getting with city planning on various requests to look at, contextual zoning.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that.
You're very welcome. But I also encourage everyone to that planning study is available on CB12's website. You can download it, you can view it there, and there's an executive summary version, which is not hundreds of pages long. So a number of things that we're talking about today were talked about, a dozen or more years ago and are still very, very relevant because the built form of our community predates the current zoning.
Okay.
And so it's not that the people who are building under the current zoning are doing anything, bad or evil. It's just that the type of building, the scale that's encouraged is something that is, out of character with the buildings that existed before the zoning even existed.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So going from Lauren to Laura, who was one of the first people, but then said she'd circle back. So Laura, do you now have a question, comment?
Yeah, I actually have a couple. First, I want to thank you for your advocacy of trying to keep the neighborhood within character. And in order for us as neighbors and community members here, is there a way for us to advocate to the city that we are behind trying to keep our neighborhood in that purview? That's one question. I'm going to try to rattle these off real quick. Also, is there a way for us to find out what is the as of right permit as of right now for that space? Because obviously the aerial properties advisors, what they're advocating on their website of up to 275,000 buildable square feet. I'd like to find out whether that's within the as of right purview, so we know whether we're looking at that or whether that's just speculation of what could be there if they were able to get that permits through. So is there a way for us to find out what is?
Yeah, two things.
Yeah.
We have on this Teams meeting representatives from the Manhattan Borough President's Office and representatives from the Department of City Planning. So it would be perfectly reasonable for residents who are concerned with neighborhood scale to let the Borough President's Office know. And Mark Levine used to be a member of Community Board 12. To let the Borough President's Office know, to let City Planning know that they in fact support the advocacy that the board has put forth over probably a decade to advance contextual zoning. And textual zoning doesn't mean everything is the same all over Washington Heights and Inwood, because the scale of the neighborhood where Vivian and I live is different from the scale around Jamel Mansion, which is different from the scale in Inwood. So it's really sort of location and neighborhood specific, so that you don't stop new development, but you model new development so that it fits with its environment. So you can certainly let them know. And as I said, every month except for August and July, the community board is meeting, and the more people, you don't have to be a member of the community board to participate in these committee meetings. So the more people who participate will let us know their interest and actually help us to advance things, the better.
That was my last question, is how do we sign up for your email blasts so that we know when these are happening?
You go to the community board's website, and I believe you just do it online.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's 7:50. I'm sorry, I'm going to take two more, and I'm going to ask folks that if to touch on new things, because as I've said, we don't have any specific information on the project. We've asked the developers to come, so when and if they agree, that'll be on our agenda. So to use our time wisely, let's not repeat things. The next person I see is John Bader.
Hi, Benjamin. This is John Bader. I'm a neighbor of others who have spoken. I'm at 725 West 184th Street, which is right across from the new building. And I have one question about what we can do as prospective neighbors of this new building if you think about the process that goes from filing the plan to getting approval and building, what are the points where there are opportunities for public comment and for us to make our positions known?
I would go back to my comment about the type of development. If there are no discretionary actions required, then there are no formal points in the process where either community board and or community input is solicited. And that's because, you know, you would have the developer and their architectural engineering team, you know, basically dealing, you know, with the building department and dealing with whatever objections come up based upon how the proposed plans do or do not, you know, comply with code. Having said that, you can let the borough president's office know now what your concerns are, and the borough president's office can play a role in speaking, you know, with the building department or the commissioner of DOB to, you know, let them know what the community concerns are, issues of safety and noise and dust, all of which have to be addressed in construction plan, but depending upon how much attention is given to it, those plans, you know, can be, you know, more or less robust.
All right, thank you. Yes, and just as a side note, I lived here during the last attempt, and there was a neighborhood group that did precisely that and was able to get some measures put in place. However, the jackhammering did exceed the permitted decibel levels at that time consistently, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. We also obviously want to make sure that the building fits the neighborhood.
Right. So I'm going to shift to I'm going to do a transition because I see two committee members with hands up, but then I'm going to shift, you know, back to the agenda, although I think this conversation was really useful for both the borough president rep who are here and the city planner rep, because these are some of the things, in fact, we're talking about. So Daniel, I think I saw your hand first.
Yeah, before I even ask my question, would this be the proper time to ask about 4650 Broadway?
No, I think we would do that when we're speaking with city planning.
Copy, so I'll hold on my question then.
Steve?
Yeah, I would just want to say to the people from the neighborhood who have joined this meeting tonight that Wayne's advice is good. You should check in with the borough president's office, but I would not limit yourself to that office. You have a council member, Carmen De La Rosa. You have an assembly member, Al Taylor. You have a state senator, Bob Jackson, who lives like right on a block away on Fort Washington and 183rd. So I think all three of those people would also want to assist you and reach out to DOB and make sure that whatever plans are submitted by this developer are given a very careful review to see whether or not they are in fact satisfied, whether they in fact satisfy the as of right criteria. So I would not limit yourself to just the one elected official.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, use all of the elected officials. I simply pointed out the borough president because, you know, A, he is the borough president, and
Right.
B, he's a former member of this board.
No, and he lives in this neighborhood as well.
Right. And just a quick, I didn't answer. The as of right, it's a simple math calculation. Whatever the size of the site, so if you have a 10,000 square foot site, and if you're in a zoning district that allows what's called a floor area ratio, which is a multiplier of 3.5, you would take the 10,000 square feet, you multiply it by 3.5, and so the most you could build is 35,000 square feet. So you can go to probably the Department of Finance's website or DOB's website, look up that site, get the square footage, and it's Department of City Planning. You can find it, but the zoning is probably, it's probably R7-2, although it might be R8. But the point is, you would simply take the square footage of that, multiply it by whatever factor, and that's the maximum square footage. If you were to reach out once again to the borough president's office, they do have planning staff who do this for a living, so it might be easier for them to do that. We've done that in the past, where a developer has said that they're building XYZ as of right, and we've reached out to our planning liaison at the borough president's office, or our planning liaison at Department of City Planning, and said, do you agree with their calculation? So that might be an easier way for you to check the math. And actually, I think that's a perfect segue to the first item, which was a discussion with our new Manhattan Borough President liaison, who is still here, although his camera's off. So it's Porfirio Figueroa. And I know that I think many of us met you at the sort of virtually at the general meeting. I think I met you in person at the Hispanic Society. But one of the things we wanted to talk to you, and I don't know if Lizette is here about, is, we understood that at least for the time being, there would not be a designated sort of planning staffer in the borough president's office that would work with, CB12, although planning staff is available and you can still access them. So I think Mark mentioned that he's in the process of hiring some more. So I just wondered if you could give us some more background on that. But given what we just discussed, how could planning staff at the borough president's office be helpful to the board and to residents to sort of test the math on this proposed project to see, if the square footage that is proposed actually reconciles with the as of right zoning?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging me, Wayne. I just wanted to let you know, thank you for allowing me to be here. However, I am here with my colleague, Lizette Chaparro, and actually that's her expertise, which
Wonderful.
is land use. And she leads the group here at the Manhattan Borough President's Office. So Lizette, if it's okay, I'll just turn it over to you.
Yep.
So welcome, Lizette.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Porfirio. I'm the Director of Land Use for the Borough President. We do have a number of planners who work in our office. And I just want to know, we, as Wayne alluded to, are in the process of hiring and filling out our planning staff. In the interim, any issues or questions that folks want to bring to our office's attention as they relate to land use matters, you all can feel free to reach out to me. I'll drop my information. Is the chat the best way to convey that information, Wayne, or is email best?
I would say if you were to, I don't know if you can put it in the Q&A, if you can find. If not, if you were to email it to Ebenezer, we can make sure it gets, circulated around.
Sure. We will have in short order a staff member identified once we fill out our staff, who will be sort of your point person within the land use department. But in the meantime, you all are stuck with me. I'm happy to be here, happy to have been invited, and taking notes on the myriad issues that are being brought up across the district.
We're happy to be stuck with you. We may keep you. So, the question is, for this particular site, do we need to give you any particular information, or can you look into, getting the sort of the square footage on the site and run a calculation to see if what is permitted as of right matches with what is in social media assuming social media is correct, which isn't always the case.
Yeah, I think so. A number of things. Of course, I think as you well know, Wayne, it's not always a simple FAR calculation in terms of getting a sense of whether a project is as of right or not. There could be other elements such as use or the building envelope, depending on what the underlying zoning district is, that may require discretionary approval of some sort, even though the proposed building might be the permissible square footage, right? So there are a number of elements that have to be looked at very closely. And whenever we have done that analysis, we've always done it in partnership and in consultation with our colleagues at other city agencies. We reach out to DCP, we reach out to DOB. To be perfectly transparent, there have been times when we may have a difference of interpretation, but we always make sure that we are in touch with our colleagues and sort of confirming that our work and our calculation and assumptions about what is as of right is accurate. I'm a bit hesitant, on speculating on something that when stuff is posted on social media, there's just no zoning floor area calculations. There are renderings that are just that they're sort of illustrative, but also don't have the necessary details in terms of the floor area calculations that we would really need to answer the question of whether something is as of right or not. But one thing we do certainly take seriously is any developments that will be of concern to the local community, and we track what's going on, what's being filed at the DOB, what's been approved by the DOB, what permits are pulled, and again really rely on the community to also be the on the ground experts who can give us information and updates as they're seeing it in their own street.
Do we have questions, comments for Lizette from committee members? Particularly given the conversation we just had about this proposed project? Jim?
So nice meeting you. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Anyway, the thing Wayne sort of alluded to, and it's more than an illusion, is this site is literally a cliff. And so the building as seen from Overlook Terrace is basically probably 100 feet lower than Fort Washington Avenue, which is the street on the other side. So the same building that would look 6 stories high from the upper end of the cliff will look whatever stories high from the lower end of the cliff. And as Wayne alluded to, the zoning as it has conceived, as it has been written, although it works for these odd looking, natural hills in Staten Island, but it was never designed to work for cliffs, and it doesn't work for cliffs. And so your help and guidance and such will be very helpful with this very complicated site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vivian? Vivian, you're muted.
Now I'm unmuted. I just wanted to actually not to get into it here, Lizette, but to see if you're also following some of the other construction lower in Washington Heights and at the northern end of Hamilton Heights. We're getting a 28-story building along the side on 153rd, along the side of the cemetery. That's already in construction. There's a bunch of us are fighting a potential 17-story large building on 158th Street behind the there's a developer who owns 6 of the row of 12 houses leading down to the highway and a large lot behind it. And that would be very distressing. And then there's a 1851 house that's on the lower drive that has known ties to abolitionism and was built, but all this. So at least out of this venue, I would like to make contact with you just to talk about some of the stuff, because it's all happening faster than any of us ever imagined up here.
Yeah, yeah, we're and have been following, and just for the folks who haven't met me prior, I was land use director under the previous Manhattan BP as well. So these are sites that are very familiar to myself, but also the current BP's office. So we have, I've personally worked and advised Gail on the 857 Riverside house and the row houses on 158th Street. So we're well aware of those projects and welcome you flagging any other ones for us as well.
The 153rd Street is one of those.
Yeah, that's CB9.
It is CB9, but it's something if Lizette is interested in.
Yeah, I'm just letting Lizette know if she's going to follow up with that, it's with CB9.
Okay.
But I would just, sort of alter one thing that Vivian said. It's not that these developments are happening faster than anyone thought. We raised the issue probably a decade ago, if not more so. And I think since you've been with Gail's office, we've talked about the soft site analysis that was done when Scott Stringer was borough president. That's where we began to focus on the fact that the area west of Broadway from 155th all the way up to I think 177th is all R8. No idea why that's the higher density. And so both the row houses and the abolitionist home, they're in an R8 district. And depending upon what the market is for development, those were obvious soft sites. And there were a number of sites that the study pointed out that although they're built up based on current zoning, they're less than 50% of the as of right. So, as the market heats up, and it is now heated up, those sites become potentially threatened. So it's that we've raised the issue, we've asked for action, and I may be, misstating because it may be more than 10 years ago. It's just that those requests have gone nowhere. Steve?
Well, I would appreciate the opportunity if Lizette is willing, once she has a staff member on board assigned to us, if we could maybe sit down and brainstorm and talk about how we can pursue a contextual zoning plan for Washington Heights and Inwood. Something we also have spoken about for a number of years without any success. And I think, when Stringer was borough president, I believe he had some success in reaction to the Columbia Manhattanville project in producing a plan for Hamilton Heights, and we might be able to look at that as a possible model. But I would like to see something done for Washington Heights and the rest of Inwood, and I think the only way we can do it is with the borough president's assistance. And my other pet peeve is the large vacant lot we have between St. Nicholas and Amsterdam Avenues, between 162nd and 163rd Streets, which to me is right now it's a blight on the community, but to me it's an optimum site for potential development, and it's privately owned by John Katzmatidis, but I would like to see the borough president and others apply pressure on Mr. Katzmatidis to either develop the site, or if he can't figure out what to do with it, donate it to the city, and the city should figure out what to do with it.
Yep. Thank you. And I would say we would definitely welcome that meeting taking place soon, and we'll let everyone know once we have a planner who is a dedicated point person for the board.
Tanya?
I had a question about whether you all, because people were asking about the developer of the site that was discussed earlier by the community regarding whether your office could do something to help to facilitate a conversation between the board and that developer. Is there any role that your office could play in facilitating that conversation to occur?
Yeah, we've certainly as an office reached out to developers in the past to mixed results, to be honest. There's nothing we can do to compel someone to come to the table, but it doesn't hurt to ask and explore that avenue. And sometimes folks in the community might know, who the more collaborative developers are, but we are certainly willing to try. So we can do that.
Well, if I could just add, these developers, if you take a look at their website, appear to be very active and to own a lot of properties, and probably have an interest in not wanting to alienate city government, because at some point they may need city government for one reason or another. So I think Tanya's suggestion is very good, that the borough president's office may in fact be helpful in reaching out to them, and maybe they would be more responsive to the borough president than they would to our lowly community board.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. Actually, I would like to, and I think this might also go to a question that Daniel was going to ask. We also have with us Olivia Olmos from the Department of City Planning. And I know that City Planning is here because they wanted to listen to the discussion on what our thoughts on the R8 zoning. But one of the things that we put on the table is, since we would have someone from City Planning here, if they could just kind of give us a briefing on what's called the equitable development tool. There will be, I understand, a more thorough presentation sometime in the future. But Olivia, could give us a few comments on that. But the other thing is, we were talking about the project that was under the Fresh application a couple of months ago, and what we pointed out last month and the month before. I think you and Annie White pointed out to us that the way the program is currently structured, if the application satisfies certain technical criteria, the chair of city planning doesn't have much latitude in terms of its approval. And one of the things those guidelines do not currently include is any kind of a needs test that looks at existing supermarkets that are not built under the program. The program now includes a needs test, so that I think if within a half-mile radius, if there's 40,000 square feet of restaurants built under the program, it kind of says, okay, you can't do any more here. But it doesn't say anything about existing supermarkets. So you could have a 50,000 square foot Whole Foods across the street, and it wasn't built under the program, so it kind of wouldn't count in terms of the analysis. And so that's one reason why, in terms of the community board and the elected officials sharing their objection to that, it still didn't go anywhere, because the way the program is currently structured, the fact that there are other supermarkets nearby is not a consideration. But if you could just give us kind of an overview. A lot of us are interested in what this equitable development tool means and will do, and maybe just a little bit more for folks who want to better understand the 4650 Broadway.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Olivia Olmos. I'm new to city planning. I'm the planning liaison for community boards 9 and 12. So I can touch on fresh certifications and the 4650 Broadway site in a minute, but I'll start off with our new equitable development data tool. I have some links here. I'll add them in the chat when I'm done with my spiel. But anyways, this is a new tool that first came out of local law 78. That was last year. And that law required a citywide equitable development data tool and racial equity reports on housing and opportunity. So the tool lets you explore data on housing and demographics and public health and really compare data across New York City neighborhoods and racial and ethnic groups. So it also includes a displacement risk index. It's designed to be very user-friendly, but it incorporates various housing and demographic factors that may contribute to displacement risk faced by residents and tenants. And although the tool, we're aiming for early April, the tool officially and fully launches on Friday, so the 8th. And DCP is in the process of incorporating comments that we received. So we'll plan, like Wayne said, to present a full briefing on the tool with experts from DCP who actually were hands-on involved in designing the tool at perhaps the May land use meeting. But again, if you all have any questions, my colleague Annie White was not able to join tonight, but you're welcome to send questions or even suggestions that we can incorporate in the tool's feedback to myself or Annie, and she'll be at the next committee meeting. And I'll drop some links. There's a very helpful video that just kind of gives a overview of the database and also how you kind of navigate the site. It's very straightforward, very hands-on, meant to be accessible. So y'all can take a look at that if of interest. But touching on 4650 Broadway, really the update I wanted to let you all know about is that this past week at DCP, we've received, well over 130 letters expressing concern over out of context development near Fort Tryon Park at the 4650 Broadway Development Fresh site. And like Wayne was pointing to, the former DCP chair, not Dan Gorodnick, who we're currently in the process of briefing and ramping up to speed on current projects, but our former chair, Anita Laramont, found that the private application met such findings that would say that the fresh certification was granted. So we are aware that we're aware of this needs test that you all have mentioned at several meetings, looking at existing supermarkets, but we're also aware of a lot of oversaturation of fresh markets in neighborhoods who feel like there's kind of this surplus of markets in fresh designated zones and overlays. So we're looking into concerns over text amendments in that regard. But it is worth noting that the height of this mixed-use building, the proposed building, could have likely been achieved without the fresh certification. But that's what I'll say for that. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to loop Annie in and get back to you at our next meeting about that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things we pointed out in the resolution, although it might have gotten taken out a little bit, taking it out doesn't change the facts that the height of the building, is permissible with or without fresh. I think it's the allocation of residential. I think the fresh allowed them to add another 20 units. So, they could have built the square footage, but they would have been limited with the number of residential, and the rest of it could be community facility. And while they have community facility, clearly there's a greater need. So the fresh, and that was our argument, that the program was really only being used to allow them to, build more residential in that. And if they didn't have a market for the community facility, then arguably the building would have been a couple stories shorter, not because they couldn't build it, but because there was no demand for that additional space as community facility. And I think that is the real concern, that the program not be misused. So instead of addressing a real community need for having available fresh fruits and vegetables, that it's just kind of like what happened in downtown Brooklyn and other parts of Brooklyn, where it's used to get the zoning bonus. So you end up with this oversaturation of, fresh supermarket spaces so that you can get, more residential square footage in the buildings.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for, providing that overview. So like I said, we're looking at, amendments to the oversaturation issues that we're seeing in the text amendments, but happy to discuss that with you all. And anyways, Wayne, I also did want to follow up that, like I said, we had a briefing with our new chair, Dan Gorodnick, just in the past weeks, maybe past 3 weeks. And in terms of next steps for, maybe facilitating a dialogue on this topic and other contextual rezoning proposals, The Manhattan office, I was asked to relay that we are happy to meet with your board or whoever you select to choose and discuss these proposed rezonings. And that meeting would include myself and Annie White, also in charge of Upper Manhattan, and our deputy director, Eric Botsford. So, if we want to come up with a date to have that meeting, we're more than welcome. But that would not be in the land use forum. That would be a separate meeting.
Right, and I think we'd be more than happy to have that. Years ago, and I don't remember who was chair then. I don't know. I think it was before Shaw. It was years before Shaw, but we met in city planning's office. It was myself and the chair of the board and, Edwin Marshall and Edith and a few others to talk about a few things. But that was the last time we had a focused sit down with real decision makers at city planning. And we'd appreciate the opportunity to, get back to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely welcome that. I know that that's something that occurs, regularly with other community boards, a series of, monthly meetings. And so I absolutely would love to facilitate that. And hopefully it starts with possibly a May meeting that we can put in the books.
That would be great. I mean, Steve Simon mentioned that when Scott Stringer was borough president, he basically facilitated that contextual rezoning for CB9. CB9, put together a well-received 197A plan, but the problem with 197A plans is they have no force of law. So Scott basically took the recommendations from the 197A plan and crafted it into a rezoning, and he was instrumental in pushing it through. We were told after, literally the day after that plan, the rezoning was approved, that city planning realized that they've sort of been neglecting CB12 and that it was our turn at bat. And, it's a big area and they really can't do it all at once. So they asked us to identify the part of the district where we should begin. And we did that. And once again, that was the last we heard of it. So that it's, unfortunate, but I did point out to Gail when she was still borough president that, sort of given the lack of, response that we're getting as a board, she may need to play, and now Mark may need to play the role that Scott did to say, I am going to, be the lead for this, and city planning is not going to ignore me.
Well, I think let's definitely put something in the books for May, and perhaps it turns into a, regular meeting. And I think good conversation would come of that.
Right. And so Daniel has his hand up. And I think, as I mentioned, Daniel originally, early in the meeting raised the 4650 Broadway issue. So Daniel?
Yeah, I'm extremely concerned about this. I don't even know how how tall this building is going to be. I live right across the street from it. This building has been under heavy renovation for the past 3 years. There's a lot across the street where they just finished building up a building. Past few days there's been dust coming out of that building. And now if you can see where I don't know if you can see well the picture. Wait, hold on.
Yeah, if you hold it back from the screen a bit, it's clear.
Unmute yourself. No, you.
There. Sorry. I want you to see where I live at, and you can see the park out over here. A lot of people in this building is gonna lose that view of the park, and just the fact that just being able to see the park and being able to see the skies and all that stuff, that's really good for mental health, and especially after COVID. But I'm extremely concerned that this thing is going to be a sore thumb in this whole neighborhood. I'm not opposed to brand new buildings or anything like that, but a tower right next to the park, overshadowing the park and everything, and disturbing these people that live on Duncan Street back out over there. Disturbing the people that live on Sherman, disturbing the people that live on Elwood as well too. It's mind-boggling to me,
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I think it's really important that we see, residents' views from their window and see that perspective. I'm hopeful that in this conversation that we can go ahead and start in May and make it a long-standing series of conversations. We're able to bring in, those types of perspectives and the reality of what you're seeing out your window. So thank you for sharing that. And I'll be sure to share that with Annie and Dan and Eric when we do facilitate this conversation. So thank you.
And not to interrupt anybody, but I also have like one quick question. Like, let's say this building does get put up and all that stuff. Like, would anybody in the residence actually have like first pick to be able to live in this building? Like, if they say that they're gonna make at least like a certain amount of buildings, like, yes, we get it. A lot of these buildings are old and all that stuff, but would the actual community benefit or like be able to say like, hey, like I've been living here and like you guys have a brand new space, like I would like to live there, and like that shouldn't be a problem,
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Daniel. I don't know if there's a preference for existing tenants who, that is their community, that's their street, that's their neighborhood. I'll check on that. I don't believe so, but I think that's an important angle that we'll consider. We're not the property owners, so that's not necessarily our decision, but I think city planning does have a role in being an advocate for speaking for existing tenants and whether they are able to, pursue tenancy ahead of others. So thanks for bringing that up. That's also a good point. I hadn't thought about that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that in some cases, depending upon, well, if the city owns the site, or if the city, or in some cases, the state is providing financing, then, that lottery process is used. And with the lottery process, there is it used to be, it may still be a 50%, community preference. And I believe there are also preference for municipal workers and other things, but, so I don't know how this is being, financed, but to your point, Olivia, I mean, even if it's not required, if the project is moving forward, given all the objections, one of the things the developers may do is to, kind of voluntarily, have the marketing and the tenancy be subject to that kind of, program where there is a community preference, so that, folks who live, particularly folks who live in the area that are not in buildings that are ADA compliant and need more compliant buildings. And it could just be older folks, but, because the new building based on current codes will have to be ADA compliant. Steve, is that an old hand or a new hand?
It's both old and new. In response to Daniel's point, I don't believe that there are any that there's any city financing, and I don't believe that we have any leverage in which to expect them to provide any community preference. I think if they had that intention, they would have already made that clear. They would have tried to maybe pick up some neighborhood support by letting us know that they intended to do that. So I think it's fair to assume that they have no such plan, and that this is for the most part going to be market rate. Although they did tell us they were going to seek tax abatements, and maybe it was through 421A, which may or may not exist in the near future. So at least with 421A, I believe they would have to keep the apartments under rent regulation. But again, no community preference. I have two questions that also relate to this project. The first would be, I'm assuming that the reason that the building qualifies for the FRESH program is because a determination was made some years ago that this community suffered from a lack of supermarkets that provide fresh produce. But that could have been a determination that was made a number of years back. And so what I would suggest is that you can't just continue to function based on a determination that was made years ago, before there might have been a number of new supermarkets that opened up in the community. And I would reiterate that whenever someone applies for a fresh to benefit, that a new determination would have to be made as to how many supermarkets are in that immediate vicinity that do or do not provide fresh produce, that you could not just rely upon a determination that was made years ago. And I think that may be a factor in what happened here at 4650 Broadway. It's not that we have a surplus of supermarkets. We don't have this oversaturation issue that too many supermarkets in our community are getting the fresh benefits. That's not the case. But we have at least 4 or I believe 5, maybe 5 supermarkets in a quick walk around this neighborhood that are full service supermarkets.
But I think that, Steve, that's exactly the point that, in theory, we are going to discuss, although maybe we'll end up discussing it in May. Right. My understanding, and Olivia, correct me if I'm wrong, but the determination of which neighborhoods or districts the program is applicable to is, at the city planning level, and Fresh 2 expanded the neighborhoods of the district. So for example, initially Staten Island had no neighborhoods, and now the northern, part of Staten Island is now, eligible. I believe in the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn had some, and it expanded. Washington Heights and Inwood, I think maybe more than just Washington Heights, Upper Manhattan, was in the program from the beginning. So, but we check the resolution. But the point is, we never had any development under the program, and what we pointed out earlier and are seeking to have city planning look at is exactly what you said. The fact that the area or the district is in the program doesn't mean that in a particular site, if you use the same rationale that's used to look at supermarkets built under the program, where if you're within a half a mile, so in your case, if you say you can just go a couple blocks, that would be within that half-mile radius. If you have supermarkets there, you kind of deduct that square footage from what would be eligible, and only, the balance would be, what you can do. The current program does not look at existing supermarkets that are not built under the Fresh program. So using your example, for this project, if there are 3 supermarkets within 2 blocks of it, they don't exist. And I think the community point is, in the analysis of the application, they should exist. They should be considered.
But Wayne, they must have looked at existing supermarkets way back when they first decided that our community qualified for the Fresh program. But my point is, is that the conditions on the street may have changed.
No, I understand your point exactly, and we can look at it, but it's more than just, supermarkets. I believe there are also certain, health indicators that were not good in certain neighborhoods, and I don't think those health indicators have gotten any better. I don't think the diabetes, high attention, I don't know that we've suddenly, gotten better. So let's not, shoot ourselves in the foot. I think we do need to make sure that if the intent of the program was to address a public good or public need, that it's doing that and it's not being misused, similar to the conversation that we had years ago and continue to have with 421A, where, it was intended back in the 70s, those of us who were around then, to promote, development, because nothing was happening, but the market changed. And there was a lot of discussion that 421A should only be used if it's going to support affordable housing, because the data shows that something like, 95% of the housing that 421A has supported has been market rate or luxury. I don't think the program was modified along the lines of what community boards have advocated for. And so now it's in danger of, going away. And it would be wonderful if, when the agencies having jurisdiction asks for comments from community boards, they consider it seriously. Because I recall, because I think I helped to write the resolution, CB12 never said that 421A should go away. We said that it really should focus on affordable housing. And when we talk about affordability, we need to talk about what's affordable based upon the AMI of people who currently live in their area, not the citywide or the metropolitan statistical, because that skews it to much higher income.
Let me ask my question about the community facility space, because that also bulks up this building. There's a large amount of space which has been reserved for a charter school and I believe for a medical facility. And when the developer or developer's representative came before our committee some months ago, they were still talking in hypothetical terms about who the tenants might be. And they had not yet secured actual leases with these tenants. But they're proceeding to go ahead and build this building anyway with all of that community facility space. Shouldn't they have to prove that they actually have tenants to use the community facility space before they have the right to go ahead and build that space?
Actually, they did identify the charter school. You'll remember Liz commented on it. I think they did not identify the medical tenant.
No, they only told us that it was an existing school in the community. They never told us who it was, and they said that they were still in discussion with that school, so they couldn't reveal who it was.
Yeah, so, I mean, what I don't think, and Olivia or Lizette or Prefer can say, I don't think the city planning or the borough president's office plays any role in developments where the developer has to prove or show, who the tenants are. That is more of an issue. I know when EDC or some of the banking that, they want to see who tenants are if the financing is going to convert from construction to permanent financing, because then they have certain requirements for, the quality and type of tenant. But, you can ask, but I'm pretty certain, Steve, the answer is no, that they don't have to show city planning or prove to city planning, because at the end of the day, city planning is going to say that if they build the space and they don't have tenants, they are the ones taking the economic loss, not the city of New York.
Yeah, but meanwhile, we then end up with a much taller building.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Steve, but you can ask the question. I think the answer is going to be no.
No, but what we could take the position is that they should not get the building permit until they can prove that they have the tenant.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
Okay. All right, Olivia, how many letters did you say you'd received at city planning? Was it 150?
Over 130 and counting.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that shows the depth of concern in this community over that project. And it's not limited to this community. There are people around the city who are concerned about the impact on Fort Tryon Park, which
and
is
the cloisters,
and which are after all New York City landmarks.
So let me ask a question. One of the items we have on the agenda was a proposed discussion of changes to the Fresh 2 program. And it sounds, Olivia, that you're saying city planning is in fact looking at including some sort of needs test. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, what I was getting to in the May meeting, I thought that would be a good conversation point to look at, fresh expansion to Fresh 2 requirements and how we could incorporate your comments, which I remember have been brought up at previous meetings about oversaturation and, looking at how we're identifying needs-based areas and how we're mapping Fresh 2 zones in the amendment. So, we're not actively looking at it. We know that it's a topic that's been raised at community board meetings, but I was thinking that actually would be a great discussion point, to go alongside our contextual rezoning conversations that hopefully we plan.
But I would think it would be, because it strikes me that the committee may not need to discuss that as a separate topic since we're discussing it already. But what I would say is that we do want city planning to actively consider it. The point that what Steve has made, that what I've made, I think goes to Daniel as well, is, if it made sense to modify the guidelines based on the experience, and I think per your city planning's presentation, it was primarily in Brooklyn, where you tended to get an oversaturation of supermarkets, not because there was a need for the supermarkets, but because there was a desire to get the zoning bonus. And so now any new application, there's this needs test where if within a half-mile radius, there are other supermarkets built under the Fresh program, you can't have more than 40,000 square feet. And so if you already have 40,000 square feet within that area, you can't have a new Fresh supermarket. And if you have 35,000 square feet, you can only have 5,000, but I think that will be too small for the Fresh program standard, so it means you can't have it. We think that needs to be a similar test should be included so that you're also looking at existing supermarkets that are not built under the program, but nonetheless serve the need and the intent of the program. And I say the need and intent because I used to work for Harlem CDC years ago, and there was a study done on 3rd Avenue in El Barrio, and there were a lot of stores and bodegas, but what that study showed is a lot of them did not have a tremendous amount of fresh fruit and vegetables, a lot of canned goods, a lot of processed foods. So just because you have stores nearby doesn't mean they're necessarily serving the need and intent of the program. So I would think that if we would do this, we'd also want to recognize that we're not just going to put on dots on a map and say, here's a store and here's a store, here's a store, but there'll be some research to see whether that store is primarily canned and boxed goods, or whether you can get fresh fruit and vegetables and food that are not processed and heavily salted.
Yeah, certainly, Wayne. Thank you for elaborating. I mean, I remember this has been a topic at previous discussions, but thank you for providing more context, and I do hear what you're saying.
Anything further from the committee for either the borough president, staff, or for city planning? Okay, so I would say that we've actually covered the Fresh 2 discussion, which kind of takes us into the discussion of the R8 zoning. But let me ask, I sent some documents for reference to the committee. One was a really, really brief summary of contextual versus non-contextual or height factor zoning, which isn't new information because a lot of us had dealt with it before, but I thought it would have been useful. And then some, sample of contextual R7, R8 districts that we might recommend, as a replacement of the current height factor R8. Did my committee members have an opportunity to review those documents, to form some opinions on them?
I did.
Anyone else?
Well, to be honest, the only thing I reviewed was the 2010 resolution.
Okay, so Jim, what did you, I mean, it strikes me that maybe it doesn't make sense to, at 8:45 to do this, because I think it's a worthwhile discussion. But let me just say that conceptually, because I mean, I think, we asked city planning to take seriously our request to rezone the R8, and they came back to us and said, fine, tell us what you have in mind. So we need to, do our homework and tell them what we have in mind. So I think conceptually what we're saying is, if we're in an area where, we've got predominantly, 5 or 6 story buildings, there are some outliers. I mean, Vivian lives in a much taller building. I live in a much taller building. But if we're looking particularly at that stretch of, Riverside Drive, that stretch of, Fort Washington Avenue, that, R8, a new development, will not necessarily, limit the bulk to something that matches. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if it's a story or 2 taller, that's different than being 2 times the size. I think conceptually what we're saying is we want one of those R districts with a letter after it that would require the buildings to more or less match the height of those buildings. And I think the three samples that I gave you, I think one of which is an R7. I think it's like an R7D or something like that. And the other two are, I think, R8A and R8B. And I started with the R8s because the area is R8. My concern with even those two R8 contextual districts is the buildings max out at 10 or 12 stories. And I realized that in new construction, as opposed to existing construction, the stories are less, but 10 or 12 stories I think may be too tall. I think the R7D maxes out at 7 or 9 stories, which is more in keeping. We looked at a building years ago in a mid-block location where I think it was an 8-story building, but it was, a new construction. And compared to the 6-story building on either side of it, it only appeared to be 1 story taller because the floor to ceiling heights in new buildings are not going to be, 12 or 14 feet. So, that was what was guiding my review, not just contextual, but contextual that had a height limit that made sense for the area. So, I mean, if Jim is the only one who would look at it, but conceptually, what do other board members think about how we should be thinking about it?
Well, let me just comment on what I saw, which is sort of consistent with well, I did not look at the R8 at all because nothing else is R8, so I just dismissed that. And R8 is obviously in general bigger than R7. It turns out, as Wayne pointed out, there are like 4 flavors of the R7 with contextual, housing. And the earlier they are in the alphabet, the smaller they are. So there's one, I think, near the end called X or something that's probably about as bad as the R8 would have been. So, but I think, and obviously everyone will have an opportunity before next month to look at all this stuff. The diagrams, for example, that are in the land use handbook make it very clear what the differences are. And I think, like I said, the R8, the R7, the ones early in the alphabet, those are the ones that are closest to what we already have, except again for the exceptional buildings like Wayne's and Vivian's that are much bigger. Thank you.
Yeah, and there are some other buildings. I think 555 Edgecombe is another bigger building, but but once again, there are certain outliers. But I would also say to all of the the residents who were talking about the Overlook site, this is a perfect example of something that I think it will be great for you to follow. And I can have the district manager or other building staff post some of the reference information that I sent to the committee members, post it on the community board's website so that it's more publicly accessible. And the zoning handbook itself, you can download it, but there's a link that I provided to the community board, to the land use committee members. I think it's like a 200 or more page document. And when I tried to email the PDF, it's too big. But we can add these materials to the website and you can take a look at them and, please also show up at the May meeting to share that because, the issue we're talking about in terms of buildings that fit, that's exactly what you're talking about in terms of the building that is proposed on the site, on 184th. Tanya.
Yeah, I think, what you were just saying in terms of making sure community engagement happens, and you're trying to make sure that we are,
and committee member engagement too, yes.
Well, yes. Well, yes, that too.
I'm going to have a test next time. There's going to be a pop quiz.
But I think that this is, in terms of talking about this issue, I think it's just important to be proactive instead of reactive. And I think that's the approach that you're trying to take is like, if we having these changes and really could avoid some of the things that we're trying to stop or fight against now.
We've been saying that for 10 years.
And so unfortunately, because that hadn't happened in the past, we're fighting things that could have been. So I just think it's important, like the community understands, it's important to be proactive and not reactive.
Yep.
So we need their participation and
Absolutely.
these discussions, for them to show up at these meetings and participate in those proactive discussions, so that we don't have to panic when now things are coming up. That's all. I just think
I love to say that people show up, when there's a crisis, to say what they're against, but it's actually much more beneficial to show up to say what you're for.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to say. That's perfect. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. And the other point that Tanya made, and I think I pointed, what we're talking about now is not anything new. In many instances, the community board raised these issues over the last 10 or 12 years. And I think I've pointed out on a number of occasions, we've dealt with BSA applications that we would not have to deal with had certain zoning changes been made. If the soft site analysis, which revealed the threat in these R8, if that led to a rezoning, then it's not that you couldn't build, in the area where those row houses are, or the house that was built by abolitionists, but you couldn't build a 13 to 17 story building, because that would be completely inconsistent with, a contextual zoning. But, it's, there are a lot of, I think thoughtful planning activities that we undertook, with partners that then led to, I thought thoughtful recommendations. And it's just disappointing the degree which, so many of those just kind of, received no traction. And now that things are actually happening, it's like, oh my God, no one thought that would happen. I say, no, that's not true. We pointed out that there was a danger there, and when market conditions were right, it would happen. And with the average one bedroom in Manhattan being over $3,000 a month, the market is right. And that's a problem.
Oh, can I say one more thing, Wayne? What Daniel was talking about, which is true. It's like I all these developments, even all the ones that we've dealt with so far over the last year, they're not affordable. So I don't think that this one would be any different.
Yeah.
So I just, here we are,
Here we are.
It's a shame. Thank you. Sorry.
Steve?
Thank you.
Wayne, the resolution that I was sent, and which I spent some time reviewing, dealt with C8 zoning districts, not R8.
No, that's a different resolution. But yeah, the C8 resolution is the one I said, had that one been acted on, we had 3 BSA applications we had to consider because the sites were C8, and C8 is like auto and auto related. And so it doesn't allow for residential, it doesn't allow for community facility. And I think the 3 applications were all community facility type uses, but the zoning was C8. So that was one.
So are we looking at the C8 districts again? Because I have questions about what we listed in that resolution back then.
Well, that is one of the things, I believe, in the resolution from January of this year that we asked city planning to look at. But in the resolution from January of this year is the one where we reiterated our request for the R8 zoning to be addressed. And it's in response to that resolution that city planning asked us to tell them what we have in mind.
Not the C8.
Well, we can tell them what we have in mind, but in the C8 resolution from years ago, we did identify that we wanted it rezoned so that it would allow for the kind of development that's required. And we listed things like, residential and commercial and mixed use, having zoning. And it's odd because once again, that zoning is 1961. So it was overlaid on existing buildings. And in some cases, you have C8 districts that are overlaid on residential buildings, meaning a new building in that area could not be residential. And in other cases, we have, garage type structures that, are proposed for renovation for mixed use, but they can't be mixed use. I think in one case, they were keeping some floors as garage, and the lower floor was going to be retail, and the second floor so would be, commercial office. But you can't do that because the C8 only allows for like automotive related uses.
Well, I would just suggest if we're going to pursue asking for review of these C8 zones, that we need to fine tune it much more.
Right, but I think we also shouldn't lose.
There's a lot of stuff here that just isn't. It's not feasible.
Well, I don't have that in front of me. The critical thing is we're looking at the area west of Broadway, 155th to 177th, as we discussed back in January. That whole area is R8. That is the area where we have proposals for 13 and 17 story buildings. So yeah, we do want city planning to look at the C8, but now that they've asked us to tell them what we think would be appropriate for the R8, let's not lose focus and let's do that.
Right. Okay. So the idea would be to have contextual zoning throughout that west of Broadway area.
Exactly.
Okay. Very good.
And so I would, now that it's pushing 9 o'clock, I would urge my fellow board members. I mean, it's a month from now until the next meeting. Please, look at the materials that I sent. And as Jim pointed out, if you go into the zoning handbook, there are other flavors of contextual. I think he's right that any of those R8 contextuals, even though they are contextual, I think they end up being the maximum height tends to be too tall for that area west of Broadway. So I think we want to look at the R7s. I think the R7X is also too tall. The R7D may be kind of the Cinderella, but that's my opinion. I want you to take a look at that and see what you think. With that, there was going to be new business, but we dealt with the new business at the beginning of the meeting. Is there any old business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'm sorry, under old business. Is there any news about the Holy Trinity site? Wasn't there supposed to have been a hearing in March?
There was supposed to be. I thought it was rescheduled, but I don't have any information on that.
Okay.
And I think ideally, if for updates like that, it'll be great to email the office like a week or so before the meeting so that they can circle back to all of us, because asking at the meeting, unless I've had conversations, the information isn't readily available.
All right.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thanks.
Is there a second? I think Vivian second. I wish everyone a wonderful evening. I thank my colleagues from city planning and from the borough president's office for joining us. I thank neighborhood residents from joining and staying with us. And I encourage you to come back in May. Land use always meets the first Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock. Take care, all.
Okay, take care. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope to be back next month.